Hello, everybody. I'm Eyeveaux. I'm your host tonight on Black Space Live, and we have an amazing panel discussion for you. Our topic tonight is the Black mind in a Eurocentric education system. So we're getting a little heavy, but come along with us. It's going to be absolutely wonderful and totally worth the ride. Two of our favorite Black Space members in education, George Middleton and Dr. Hedley White, are here with us on the panel. Brothers, please introduce yourselves. George.
Okay, my name is George Middleton. I'm a musician, therapist, mentor, and I'm also an author producing a set of written works addressing the connection between mental health and the race construct or race ideology. The title of the book is B.L.A.C, Limiting Authentic Cultural Knowledge, Black as an acronym. It is not about skin color in and of itself. It is about beliefs in skin color, Black or white, and how we internalize that and project that onto others.
All right, thank you, Dr.
How you doing? Hedley White, associate professor at Bethune-Cookman University College of Education, and historian, and just wrapping up a semester with the best and the brightest of future minds. And I have been doing research on basically getting Black male mentors and educators in our system. So this whole discussion dovetails into what I've been working on for the last year to try to increase the number of faces like ours in the classroom.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I thank both of you for joining me here tonight to discuss this. And for the sake of the audience, I first want to define the word Eurocentric. Sometimes we assume everybody knows what it means, but when we're discussing Eurocentrism in education, it's important that we define clearly the terms that we're using. And Eurocentric, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is focusing on European culture or history to the exclusion of a wider view of the world, implicitly regarding European culture as preeminent. So I think most of us can reflect on our education, primary, high school, and even college education if we're college educated, and notice that there's a certain slant that gives preeminence to European achievements and culture and tastes. So what are your thoughts on Eurocentrism in education as it relates to the Black community in America? Dr. White?
Oh, well, it is, the winners write the history. So we have a situation and a structure where it was basically put in place by the British, right? So the American educational system, for good or for ill, is the child of the British public education system, which in and of itself was just created to create a literate class, not a educated class, but a literate class, because they needed people to be able to read the orders and for commerce, because that's basically what it was about. Paradoxically, Black people were not supposed to read because reading is dangerous. Because once you start to read, you start to understand where you are and what people supposedly say about freedom as opposed to the situation that you're in. So after the end of slavery, emancipation, you had a situation where you needed to have a second literate class. So you had the creation of the normal schools at the primary, secondary, freedmen schools and normal schools, right? So you had that situation, but you also wanted to put in place that there's hierarchical structure. So you still had, like I said, European favorite, the Western civilization, the classics. This is what you are, and that you as a Black person or a person of color, your history is not that important because you have been subjugated by the great Western European ideology. And so therefore we've been indoctrinated with that for the last 150 years in the public school system, in a secondary setting, in educational apartheid.
So George, what are the mental health implications of existing in that kind of education system for generations?
Well, I'm going to borrow the resulting outcome of that was discovered or proposed by Dr. Bobby Wright one of the first African-American psychologists who actually opened up his own agency in Chicago. And he coined the term menticide. And menticide, as he defined it, is this deliberate and systematic destruction of another culture's mind.
Wow.
And whenever you are in the standards of a culture outside of yours, you are automatically second guessing your initial inclinations, your initial way of responding, your initial way of thinking is automatically second guessed because your belief system and your way of looking at life is secondary to the mainstream society you find yourself in. And menticide, so that's just one thing. If you're traveling and you go into another country, when in Rome, so to speak, you're going to find yourself in this tension of when do I use my language and when do I adopt their customs and all that. But in America, the way it's set up, this is a deliberate, the way Dr. Bobby Wright has proposed it, this is a deliberate and systemic act at making you least comfortable with who you initially are and always looking outside of yourself for the answers with which to survive and make any type of progress. And that in and of itself drives one to if not totally crazy, to a level of just a lifetime of normalized dysfunction.
A lifetime of normalized dysfunction. So then would you agree that Eurocentricity in American education perpetuates white supremacy and a slave mentality in Black students, reinforcing the idea that white is right and everything else should be or has been or is subject to that?
I would say that in a conscious manner, that may be an accurate assessment. However, this is all these things that we're dealing with is operating on a subconscious level. We are assuming identities that we think are real, and identity by color, we have put this phase of reality to. So we now internalize that supremacy belief, and we also internalize the inferiority belief. If you believe there is a supremacy, then it's implied that there's an inferiority. And even if you reject that inferiority, it's still something you have to deal with. It's a layer that you have to address because you're trying to compete with somebody who doesn't have that layer. They have the layer of superiority. So they have the leverage in this game where we don't. So we're in their system, it's their leverage, it's operating at a very subconscious level below the radar. So oftentimes you're not even consciously ready for the hits that are coming at you. And you just accept your plot and continue in that manner. And so whenever one of us does make it, we jump for joy as if that's been a real achievement, but it's really the achievements are really individual. They're not collective. We just recently had I guess you can call it the first achievement of 5 quote unquote Black women who have won these beauty pageants. And for me, you guys can have your perspective on it, but in 2020, I just don't see being the first Black in something as a major achievement that we should be standing by. To me, I see that more as we're still trying to catch up. We're still trying to compare our self and our esteem to the mainstream, looking for that validation. Okay, look, we got 5. Now we should be somebody now. So operating in that schism of color and coming from the identity of Black, operating in their Eurocentric framework, that's a no-win situation.
So how then, Dr. White, do you propose we counteract this force that's coming against us in education for the purpose of menticide And it's clearly been effective for many people in the Black community. How do we counteract that as a community, as parents, as families? What supplemental or alternative educational options do we have, and in what direction should we be thinking?
That the issue with that is there's several things that you can do. One is you, as the first formal teacher, the community's first formal teacher. I said that in a question earlier. We need to make sure that our children are ready for what they're going to face in the Western European educational arena. They are going to be faced with these challenges, whether they go to public, private, or what have you. I think that to piggyback on what George said, many of these charter schools or these private schools and still face worse either microaggressions or just general naked racism, whether it's their hair or any other cultural trait, and they can't deal with it because they think that, to quote, their water or their ice is colder, right? So we're going to get a better educational system because this is the white school and they're going to teach our children right. But they, in fact, have an inherent need not to teach them right, because that's competition. It's naked competition. And I think that we need to prepare our children better. And that doesn't cost money, but we need to make them understand that they are important. And we also need, I think that we're 2 generations in to this desegregation thing. And what has happened, especially this last generation, I'd say our generation, our children, some of us are really trying to shield them from everything. So while we fought the power in 89 and 90, now they're, living this life where they had a Black president, so everything was okay, and this is surreal because they don't understand why it's happening, and it never went away. So even though they may be educationally prepared, they still have that identity issue with their Blackness, because it doesn't matter how well spoken you are when the first thing that people see is you. And the way that, like, to paraphrase Kevin Hart, the way society is set up is that you are seen for who you are, no matter what you bring to the table. So we just need to go back to preparing them for that better. And he was right about the beauty contest. First of all, I think that to still have these quote unquote beauty contests in 2020 is sexist and archaic. I really do. I'm glad, I'm happy for them. But like I said, it's interesting. But to see the aside to the racism, because you saw the way that Miss Puerto Rico supporters acted, and they're another minority, but they took on the characteristics of the oppressor to say that, oh, she was too Black, or she was too this, and she was not smart, equating, I don't know what they're equating with what, but they're just taking on the standards of European everything as opposed to, African or beauty standards. And that's really disturbing considering how dark Puerto Rico really is. It was a slave holding island, and more Puerto Ricans have Black in them than not. So that is the issue. So to go back to the educational part, that's what we have to do. We have to prepare our children, no matter what arena that they're in, that they understand that. But what our problem is, we have those people who are, you said, what was it called? Menticide? Menticide. But how about this? We have people that are menticide, lobotomy survivors, because what they have become is they are parroting everything to the point of saying that AAV is wrong and you should never use it, and there's a problem, and by speaking it, you're putting us back. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with code switching. There's nothing wrong with that. That is just another tool in our chest of survival. So we have too many of those people that are there. There's nothing wrong with being intelligent. And there's nothing wrong with speaking business English, but we have to prepare we have to get a group of people, not just educators, but everybody. We need the elders, we need the community to help with this.
Now, what does that look like structurally? Because everyone isn't able or prepared, rather, to educate their children to the level that they need right now. Many parents need to be educated. So how do we as a community, when we say we need to disseminate this information or we need to educate our children and tell them who they are ourselves, what does that look like realistically on a structural basis? George?
Why should we look at this reactionary perspective and instead look at it from a proactive perspective? If we're going into their playing field, if it's the Black mind in the Eurocentric education system, is there any way for us to actually get a leg up in a system like that? I would say not. There's no way that we can become, I mean, it hasn't happened at this point. There's no way that we can become a significant influencer in this system. You know, oftentimes we talk about this system as if it's broken, which I think and we've talked about this before, it's working perfectly well.
Mm-hmm.
The Eurocentric education system is doing exactly what it is designed to do. It balances out, it siphons out a certain portion of the community that capitalism needs for fuel. Because the ugly part about capitalism, you know, seeing how the sausage is made, is you have to have a nigga in there somewhere, meaning free labor.
Mm-hmm.
You got, capitalism has to have it. We don't like to talk about it. We like to, you know, everybody likes to say, well, I made it through my own individualism, rugged individualism, you know, work ethic. But you look at what's going on today, and many of these, you know, billion-dollar companies are getting a lot of free labor.
Right.
Or cheap labor. Well, if you look at the system of incarceration, which our school systems are feeder systems for. If you look at the system of incarceration, you have the CCA group, you have ALEC, and you have GEO. Those three are the triumvirate that lobby every year for policies in their favor for extended sentencing. Because every day in prison per prisoner is free labor and extra wealth. That's really what this conversation is all about. That's what this whole educational public school system Eurocentric piece is all about. And why we are continuing as a racial demographic to send our kids into a system that you see historically is continually sending the majority of our children at disproportionate rates to prison, and if not to prison, underserving them so that they can't even be as effective in contributing to their communities. But yet we are asking them for fair treatment and fair policies. I don't think that we're going to get that from a Eurocentric system.
Well, we won't, and I believe we all agree on that up front. However, I'm asking about what we can do today to supplement or as an alternative right now, considering the resources that many parents who may be watching have available to them right now. Idealistically, we should be more proactive in looking to build our own structures and things that work for us. But if I'm a concerned parent today and I want to start counteracting the Eurocentric influence in my child's education right now, and I don't know where to start, where do I start? How do we as communities begin to create the culture that will eventually manifest that infrastructure that we need to move away from Eurocentric education altogether?
Well, there are some parents right now that are courageous enough to do a thing that's called homeschooling. And homeschooling has some great outcomes. There's a lot of research that shows that students who take college tests that have been homeschooled often outperform those through traditional education methods. If I were a parent today with school-age children, there's no way I would send them into a public school system. I would stop immediately.
Well, there's one way. I homeschooled my oldest son until the end of kindergarten, but I was forced to stop because we needed my income. And it's too much to educate and work full time. I had to choose. And I was fortunate to be able to place my children into a good school that's on a college track with opportunities that grow higher education. But many people find it too expensive to homeschool because the needs of the family financially are competing with the educational needs. So when you find yourself in a place not able to do what you would like to do proactively, what can we do in the meantime to bridge the gap?
Two things. I think this goes back to the communal approach. That now, if you can homeschool, and you're in the right group, because there are homeschool nightmares as well. If you're in the right circle and you can homeschool, that's great. If you can't, and you're stuck because of the financial aspect of it, you just have to be active. One thing that many parents can do is monitor your child, unplug and plug them into a book. Because what has happened is a lot of this, because it's a European system, but with the advent of social media and all these games, everything is still geared to the European concept. We don't see ourselves, or if we do see ourselves, we're in a negative light. So what we're being hammered with is, you're watching even these people that play these games and these gamers and all this other stuff and YouTubers and all this. They don't reflect the positive. You might see the off the wall stuff, and that's what they'll tell you, like, oh, you could be this person, but you can't be that person. So sometimes they need to understand that there's a historical context behind. There's a historical context behind what's going on. So I mean that's the issue. So be active, be an active parent, or have somebody that is a proxy who's active. Both my sons go to public school, but I'm always there. I'm always emailing. I'm always in the office. The superintendent knows who I am because I am always in his office as well.
George, as far as taking care of the mental health of our children and young people, in counteracting the Eurocentric influence in education that we've already experienced, what can we do to help unravel that false narrative and mentality and perspective in our students?
Well, Dr. Whitehead made a statement with regard to preparing our children for this system. And he made a statement that many of us in our community have an identity issue with their Blackness. And I thought that was a very powerful statement, a very powerful assessment, because if you are not secure in your own self-identity, then you're vulnerable regardless of what environment you find yourself in. And Eyeveaux, you know the work I'm doing in this area, so I'm challenging the traditional thought about Black as a culture, about Black as an identity. I made a statement that Black is our experience, not our identity. And often we're trying to take something that represents a real significant aspect of our experience and making it be something that it wasn't meant to be. It's just meant to reflect a certain aspect of what we've gone through, but it's not meant to carry the weight of how powerful we really are. Black, a skin color, in no way can encompass the greatness that we really have. That term has been given to us by a Eurocentric framework, and we have embraced it and internalized it, because if they've given us something, you probably want to really skeptically analyze that before you internalize it and embrace it. And we don't. We have taken that identity, and this goes for people who identify as white as well, because white is not a real identity. They are just as confused as I believe our demographic is. They just have more resources with which to disguise their dysfunction, and they have the better benefit of perception than we do. That's how it was designed. So it starts with really stepping back and reevaluating who you are. In that manner, if a person were to reevaluate themselves and say, okay, I am not this Eurocentric identity that was given to me. I am who I authentically am. Then I would say you could go into a Eurocentric environment and succeed, because you see that happen with cultures that immigrate to our country. Often you hear this argument about, well, you know, those people from Africa come over and they do well, so what's your excuse? Thinking that we're all in the same boat, and we're not. Anybody from outside the country is automatically intact with their real identity, with their cultural identity. When I'm doing my workshops on this issue, on these discussions, I often have people who are from Nigeria, South Africa, and they'll come in, they've come to America for business or education. And when they attend my workshops, I hear quite regularly, I didn't know I was Black until I came to America.
Wow.
But here's the thing. They are mentally shielded against race ideology. So even when they know that someone's trying to deal with them from a point of race, because they know who they are internally, they can look at that person and assess him for what he or she's trying to do and make effective decisions and not reactions to how they're going to successfully negotiate that situation.
So if we set out on a journey to redefine ourselves in contrast to Eurocentric education, but not embracing what Eurocentrism has given us as an identity, if we let that go and we choose to embrace something else in an attempt to define ourselves, where do we start? For those of us who only had Blackness to cling to, where do we start if we then say Blackness is no longer my identity, but only my experience?
Dr. White, were you able to catch any of that?
I heard the very last part. I don't know what happened. The storm passed over, so I missed it. So can I have a quick recap before I?
She'd asked the question. How do we counteract this successfully or effectively in a Eurocentric environment? And I borrowed one of your phrases, that you had mentioned earlier, with regard to preparing our children for what they're going to have to deal with. And one of the obstacles that you eloquently mentioned was that many of us have an identity issue with our Blackness. And I stated that was a very powerful observation, and that is where the rubber meets the road for us as a collective demographic to really redefine our internalization of the concept of Black. Often we say, I'm proud to be Black, I'm glad to be born Black. However, as I said earlier, I see Black as our experience, not as our identity. We are much more powerful creatures than a skin color is able to contain. Right. We're much more powerful than that. And in the workshops that I do, those that come from other countries, like Africa, Nigeria, any of those other continents, often say in my workshops, I didn't know I was Black until I came to America, because they were already fully intact with who they authentically are. Mm-hmm. So they're shielded against this race ideology, so that when someone tries to discriminate them or use microaggressions against them or shield them from certain opportunities, because of their full sense of self-esteem and know-how, they can successfully navigate a racial environment like a Eurocentric school system?
Well, the thing is, I'm paraphrase KRS-One. KRS-One said it's real easy when you have a home to go to. So at the end of the day, you can go home. And like you said, I mean, that points to what you're saying. So if you are raised in a system, and even the Caribbean, like my family's from Jamaica. So even if you're raised in a system where you see everybody everywhere and it's a closed system and they are doing X, Y, and Z, and yes, there's racism there as well, but you see it. And then you come here where it's in your face, there's such an issue with it. And I think that in some ways it's unfair because if you are African and you come here, but you, like I said, you have that tradition, you have things that we had to manufacture or make ad hoc in an ad hoc environment. But you have that. You have that place. You have this. My name is this. My name is that. And you're in, like you said, you're fully in contact. You have your whole family background. So when you hear this European stuff, you're like, whatever, because I know who I am. It becomes a point of friction between, I would say, Black Americans and Africans, or people of African descent from other places. We always have to put we always have to reflect on this. I remember talking to my wife's grandfather before he passed, and he was like, I went from being a nigger to colored, to Black to African American, and he said I like being colored better. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I can understand that. But it's like, I mean, think about the names that you grew, that's a system that you have to go through. So, I mean, we're dealing with that internal, and we carry that burden, even though it's almost 2020, we carry that burden. I think that we need to, in the systems that we're in, and the systems that we're a part of, and our children are a part of, we need to put their feet to the fire, because it's insane. Because what they're doing is floating trial balloons. It is insane that you're having these issues with these slavery questions on math tests, the rewriting and softening of chattel slavery in history texts, and even the happy slave mantra being repeated again, like this is 1910. It's because they were feeling uncomfortable. So now they want to feel comfortable again. And they're trying to create a system where you're like, oh, it's great. It was better for you. And we don't have anything to do with this. But you have people that are in a direct line from benefiting from all the oppression that we still suffer. I mean, walking around with these famous last names, doing these things, and their direct benefit. I mean, most white people are directly benefiting from Black labor, and because we built this country. But it's just the fact that, they don't want to be uncomfortable. Anytime you bring it up, it makes them uncomfortable. So they lash out. And so we have to fight it. And until we can create our own systems, but every time we try to create our own systems, they burn them down, whether figuratively or literally. So,
And
go ahead.
Yeah. And that last statement is a very powerful statement, because we have internalized that past experience to the point of paralysis.
Yeah.
The only way that we're going to break the cycle, to borrow a phrase from Einstein, and I'm no Einstein, but I definitely appreciate his mindset. In order to solve a problem, you can't solve it with the same thinking used when we created it.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is solve a racial problem with a racial solution.
Mm.
We're trying to solve a racial problem with a racial solution. That's like trying to solve violence with violence. Race ideology is meant to divide. Race ideology, when you take on a color identity, as well-meaning as one may be, you have automatically taken a spot on the team, one or the other. And there's no way the two can unite. That game is not meant for unification. It's not meant for harmony. It's meant for you to say, if you're this color, here's where you are. If you're the other color, here's where you are. And all of the statistics support that. It may sound cynical or conspiratorial coming from me, but I would put good money on it, because you look at any quality of life system, and where do we place as a racial demographic?
At the bottom. Yeah.
At the bottom, and all of the things that we need to succeed, and at the top, and all the things that we don't need that are killing us.
Right.
So that is, and we are doing it often to ourselves more than they're doing it, because we have internalized what Black is. So let's take economics. We don't support each other economically. We don't. The typical week, we may very rarely do any economic exchange or business with somebody that looks like us. We're sending our kids in the system of education to get them to be able to succeed in a work world that doesn't look like us, that is aggressively freezing us out. So in any look at the lowest unemployment rate since the advent of our current president. However, it's still double that of white unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that no matter how good times are or how bad times are, we're going to always be lowest on the scale.
Right.
So that comes from this subconscious mindset of where people believe you rank in the hierarchy of color. And so the only way to counteract this Eurocentric education system is not only to prepare our children, but to reevaluate ourselves and our children of who we really are. As a man thinketh,
so shall he do.
And so so you got one or two options. You either redefine Black to something that you can internalize that makes you more powerful than you currently are, or you reject Black and put Black in its proper position and take on a more empowering self-identity.
Okay. Well, we have come to the end of our time, but if anyone else who's watching has comments about what we can do practically right now, what we can do idealistically in the future as we build, on the topic of Eurocentric education and how we can counteract that as Black people, redefining ourselves, internalizing our experience or not internalizing our experience in ways that we had previously, and creating a culture that shows us our children a different reality than that's being proposed to them in a Eurocentric education system. If you have any comments, suggestions, stories about what you're doing, please leave them in the comments. We're going to keep the conversation going. It's been an amazing panel discussion. Thank you, Dr. White. Thank you, George Middleton. Please, everybody get the book. B.L.A.C.K as an acronym. What does it stand for again, George?
Beliefs limiting authentic cultural knowledge. It's about the beliefs in skin color, not skin color itself.
So it's a challenging read, but we have to begin to challenge ourselves in the way we see ourselves in our community and our future so that we can start doing things differently and help our children be prepared for the world and what's coming at them and what they're going to have to deal with. Again, I thank you for coming to appear. I thank all of you for watching. It's been a great episode of Black Space Live, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you. All right.
George Middleton has an incredible ability to take an entire room full of individuals and really dive into some very controversial topics in a way like I've never seen anyone do before, giving tools and resources needed to not only encourage us to think outside of the box, but really explore days after the event to bring a lot of the content into our community. He's absolutely incredible, and I would highly suggest coming to an event. It's what this world needs right now.